educators. This is Nicole here, and I'll be joined by Kaylin, Marley, Mika, and Jenny. And we'll be talking about Southwestern U.S. dialect today and just going over a brief history, some assumptions and stereotypes associated with the dialect, and even going into some actual examples and leaving you with some activities that you can incorporate into your classroom. So we hope you enjoy listening to our podcast.
Okay guys, I just wanted to give a super quick history about the Spanish language. So the root and base of it is Vulgar Latin, and that's classic Latin with the Roman language mixed with Iberian, Celtiberian, Celt, and Carthaginians. And that was around 19 BC, so it's been around a very long time. In the 1400s, Spain started exploring, and Castilian and Andalusian made the trip over, which was super cool because it's a great language, and they start conquering, which wasn't so cool. But any political position or any position of power or administrative, they used Castilian, and like major cities had Castilian, but the crew and explorers were from Andalusia and used Andalusian. So more of the outskirts of cities and far away from the direct Spain influence is where Andalusian Spanish was used, and that is where the Spanish that's spoken in South America and Central America that's what it's from. And the vocabulary is a little bit different, and the sound is very different from like Spain Spanish, which is Castilian. And that's because a lot of the vocabulary is borrowed from indigenous people, and the sound is also, there's a lot of sounds borrowed from the indigenous languages. In 1516, St. Augustine was established, and that was super important because in the 1600s and 1700s, expeditions and settlements with the backing of St. Augustine in Spain really pushed the language and the population that was there around and north and out from Mexico all the way up to Arizona, California, Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas. Well, the Mexican government area and the land and the people and all of that, they had Catholic missionaries that would send and set up women in different towns to kind of populate California because it was a pretty unpopulated area, but it was theirs, and they wanted to, push people up into there to keep it theirs and have control of it. So they sent people all the way through California, and those are kind of like the beginnings of the Californios. And if you read this wonderful book, The Squatter and the Don, it really illustrates beautifully the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and kind of how the U.S. made a forced treaty, and these people that lived there for generations on generations on generations, they had this rich culture, this wonderful rich language. They pretty much are just kicked out of their own homes and their own land. They worked hard, they had their own, they owned that land, but because of the treaty, they no longer did. And it was just really sad because this is a serious problem. I mean, they've been here so long. They were here so much longer than any white man ever stepped foot in America. And it's just, I think that the history is so important as a place to start so that we can, use this in our classrooms and know the history of how long they have been here and how long this culture and language has been here so we can respect it and work with it.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of negative assumptions and stereotypes based upon Spanish speakers from the Southwest. It's often assumed that anyone who has a more traditional mestizo look, which is, someone with brown skin and dark hair, dark straight hair, or dark brown hair, is an immigrant or here illegally and they are undocumented. So I would just be mindful while teaching your class as elementary school educators that you don't reinforce these stereotypes. It's also important that you don't refer to undocumented people as illegals, because that can just instill a feeling of shame into kids, or what kids feel about their parents, or themselves. So to label a human being illegal makes automatically places a connotation on them, like their whole entire being is wrong, rather than just the status of having proper paperwork to be in the country versus not having that paperwork. Another unfortunate stereotype that people make is that someone with a more traditional mestizo look is Mexican, rather than being a part of the indigenous community that was there before Spanish or English influence was ever present, and that those people sometimes don't ever leave their communities, or very rarely leave their communities, and therefore do not speak Spanish or English. And just to be aware to not push that stereotype as well, and to be aware that both English and Spanish are colonial languages, meaning they are the language of colonizers, and that it's important to remember that a lot of times kids who don't speak Spanish but who are Latino children can feel some kind of shame, or feel like they're not as connected to their heritage as they should be if they don't speak Spanish, and to just remind them that that's not the indigenous language, and being able to speak Spanish or not speak Spanish does not make you more or less of a real Latino person.
That was great, Jenny. Thank you. Now that we know more about where this language comes from, it's also important to know the differences between Southwestern or Chicano English and Standard English. There's a strong degree of variation that exists in Chicano English dialects because its boundaries are difficult to separate due to the various origins of the dialects in the Southwest and Midwest regions of the U.S. Some of these different varieties are Tejano English, spoken in southern Texas, New Mexican English, which is used in central and northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, and California has several subvarieties also. Some parts of the Los Angeles metropolitan area, in particular, speak East Los Angeles Chicano English, which actually includes elements of African American vernacular English. There are many differences between Chicano English and Standard English, mainly due to Spanish interference, learning errors that have been established, and contact with other dialects of English. The pronunciations and inflections of words is what makes it different from Standard English. For example, you would say easy in Standard English and easy in Chicano English. Chicano speakers may pronounce a B sound instead of a V sound, like the word very would sound like berry, and invite would sound like invite. In Standard English, we have strong distinctions between the J and Y sounds, whereas in Chicano English, job may sound like yob, and yes would sound like jess. Another noticeable difference is the placement of the stress in a word. In the word today, Standard English speakers put the emphasis on the end of the word, and in Chicano English, the emphasis is on the beginning of the word. So it would sound more like today instead of today. So like Chicano English would be today, and Standard English would be today. The same goes for the words decide, refuse, repeat, resist. They would sound more like decide, refuse, repeat, and resist. Some of the T sounds are left out in words in Chicano English. Like if you were saying the words most, felt, and start, they would sound more like most, fell, and star. In Chicano English, the verb to be is often not present, so the Standard English sentence, this is a school, would sound more like this is school, and she is carrying her would sound like she carrying her. There are also double negatives in Chicano English that are not present in Standard English, like the little kid don't have no shoes of his own. Some of these sentence structures resemble African American vernacular English and are just spoken with different accents.
Thanks, Kaylin, for providing insight into the differences between Southwestern English dialect and the standard English language. I now will provide some specific examples of words taken from the Southwestern dialect. Some of these words are actually used in everyday standard English that I personally didn't know originated from Southwestern dialect. And these words include cantina, nana, patio, plaza, and ramada. As I was researching for specific examples, I found it very interesting to learn some of the origins of these words because a lot of these words are used in everyday language. A lot of these have to do with architecture, and these words are spoken by people who actually don't speak Spanish. So, additionally, a lot of people use widely known Spanish phrases even if they themselves do not speak Spanish themselves, such as andale, adios, hasta la vista. Many people actually know a few numbers in Spanish or colors, and they'll just insert these words into their everyday conversations even if they're not speaking Spanish. And so I'm sure there's many other examples of words or phrases that are rooted in Spanish and Southwestern U.S. dialect that we may not even consider when speaking with our family and friends. And because these words are so frequently intertwined into the English language, as educators, I believe it's really important for us to familiarize ourselves with this dialect. And also, Marley, what types of activities do you think that we could incorporate to create an inclusive environment? Because the likelihood of having a Spanish speaker in our classes will be very high, so it would be beneficial to incorporate this dialect into our classroom discourse. But even if, as an educator, if we don't personally have any English language learners in our classrooms, it will still be great to have a chance to familiarize ourselves with these words and phrases.
Okay, Nicole, there are so many ways to include Spanish in a primarily English-speaking classroom. It can be as simple as posting the Spanish words for items around the classroom or school to learning to count in Spanish after practicing counting in English. Another simple activity for incorporating Spanish in the classroom is practicing the colors in Spanish after coloring a picture, or even just asking the students the colors they see outside at recess. Playing Spanish music during free time is a great way to allow students to hear the language more fully. Books are also another great way to keep children interested in a language, and there are so many to choose from that include both English and Spanish. There are many English-Spanish books that are set in the Southwest specifically, such as Donna Floor, A Tale About a Giant Woman with a Great Big Heart by Pat Mora, or Estella Swap by Alexis O'Neill. Lastly, a project they can take home with them is a family tree. Their parents help them make a family tree, and they include the Spanish family names for the corresponding English family names, such as mom, dad, sister, brother, aunt, uncle, and whatever else. It would be a great way to get the parents involved in the Spanish inclusion as well. Thank you all for listening, and I hope this podcast was helpful in your Southwestern Spanish inclusion endeavors.